Swapnil Bharti, and we are here in Vancouver, Canada to cover OpenStack Summit. And we have with us once again Beth Cohen, legendary Beth.
Hardly.
Last time we talked a lot about diversity, and we talked about people, right?
That's
because when you talk about technology, people. This time let's talk about technology itself. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, it's a technology conference, so it makes sense for us to talk about.
And
technology.
also, I'm also a science fiction writer, so I love new technology, what's going on, and when we look at some of the new use cases or trends, edge computing is kind of becoming something, and the OpenStack Foundation also came up with a white paper.
Right. So let me talk about the sort of edge computing kind of blew out of nowhere, right?
Yes.
So last year at the Boston Summit, I did I presented the Verizon use case, and at the time I didn't call it edge computing because that didn't really exist as a concept. It was called massively distributed or FOG or something, and I didn't really associate what I was doing with the edge. But after I did the presentation, everybody kept coming up to me and saying, "Wow, this is great." So what came out of it was the idea of, maybe we should really pursue this more. So we started initially the foundation really backed the idea, but I think the foundation was. I don't think the foundation knew where it was going to go, and certainly I didn't know where it was going to go. So that's very exciting to really be part of something that's literally the start of something. So we had we ran a meetup, sort of like the Open Dev that's happening here at the Vancouver. We ran an Open Dev some meetup, I'll call it, in San Francisco. And we planned a 2-day event, and I was amazed. Over 200 people showed up at this event from literally all over the world. So one of the very cool things about edge computing is right from the beginning, it's been cross industry, cross technologies, and a very diverse community. So I'm tying in the sort of everything's kind of coming together with edge.
Right.
So it's fantastic.
Can you talk about? I mean, I do know, but just for the sake of our viewers, what are the use cases of edge? Because actually it's touching everybody's life.
Yes. So if you're using a cell phone, you're using an edge computer. Some of the most business-ready use cases are in the telco world, but that's not the only one, and I'll talk about some of them. Let me start with the one that's real today, which is the deployment of 5G in the network, which is rapidly becoming real. I know that all the major telcos are deploying 5G, and they're using edge computing concepts to do that, because what 5G is basically you have small cell connections that are spread over the network, and you need a lot of compute power, but you also need a lot of flexibility, and that's what edge computing really gives you, because you're not stuck with a proprietary box. You can be more flexible. So that's a use case that's live and in use today, and being deployed. Another one is I call it cloud in a box, which is a single box that can be 10 or 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 locations. Very common for retailers to be interested in this particular use case. And those are, very concrete. But let's move on to sort of the more, sort of the next generation use cases. There's a company that I actually met the founder of that's here at OpenStack. Today, I was attending the Crano workshop sessions this morning, and one of the attendees runs a company in Italy that has smart cameras that they put around, and that's that's a fantastic edge use, because if you think about it, surveillance cameras, there's a whole lot of nothing most of the time.
Are you talking Smart Me?
Smart cameras.
Smart Me project?
It's actually the name of the company is Smart.
Is it also through the? Is it City of Messina?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Smart Time.
I met them.
Really interesting.
Yeah, I met Giviani 1 or 2 years ago when they were working for for a smart city, and I wrote a story, and then I spotted him during the at the keynote. So I was like, hey, what? So let's talk. So I actually interviewed him again yesterday.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah.
So anyhow,
a small word.
It's a very small world. But what's really interesting about that is that's a fantastic edge use case if you think about it, because when you're doing surveillance, 99% of the time nothing's happening. I like to say, if you're surveilling a park and you're looking for nefarious activity, you don't want to transmit back to the headquarters information about trees moving. You only want to transmit the information that's useful and interesting.
Right. But when you look at this use case, then one thing that really plays a big role is deep learning or machine learning, because without that, how are you have, as you said, a huge set of data, but how do you know that there is a movement of a bad guy walking through that? Or so in edge computing, when you talk about edge computing, or because in this use case, what are the core components that play a big role there?
So what's important is you want to make sure that the compute power is put in the right location within the network to be maximally efficient. So what a lot of companies have found is, as they moved into the cloud, it generated a lot of traffic that was essentially unnecessary because it's transmitting a lot of data. For example,
if you look at it, it's like noise, not
it's noise. Yes. Yeah, right. So they're transmitting a lot of noise data to be processed in the data center and thrown away.
Yeah.
So why even transmit it when you can?
Wasting bandwidth is wasting a lot of resources in the server side. Yes.
Right. So why don't you move the compute power out to the edge, do that processing at the edge, and then only transmit back to the center what you're actually interested in looking at. This applies to not only surveillance but also smart meters, utilities. They're watching water usage. Again, you can do a lot of the processing out at the edge and then send back the interesting information back to the core.
So computing at the edge is one. What else are there?
So another use is things that are latency sensitive. So that would be virtual reality, or actually more importantly is augmented reality. So there's a lot of work around being able to do repair work out in the field. And I'll use a great example. I was working with a company that does large mining machinery, and they, needless to say, mines are not located on high bandwidth locations, but they're also located in very far distant locations. So if the mining machinery breaks, you need to be able to fix it, and you need to be able to engage that expensive senior engineer, but you can't send them out to fix them at the location. So what they're doing is they're using augmented reality devices to help the technician who's out in the field do the field repair using the information that's transmitted from remotely. So you need to have, again, compute power locally, but you also need low latency because you need that feedback, in real time or near real time.
While we're still talking the use cases, I think a few months ago or something, Amazon came out with Amazon Go. It was exciting. You walk into the store without anything and you put your stuff in your bag and everything is tracked through sensors. So is that also a use case for Edge?
It is a use case for Edge.
Because one thing, I don't want to interrupt you, but I was talking to Giviani from SmartMe, and one of the use cases he was saying was a lot of shopkeepers. They're interested in people, how they spend time either in the store, outside the store, window shopping. So is
It's
this
scary, isn't it?
yes.
How much those retailers actually know about
I mean, all of this, when he said the surveillance, I was like, surveillance is not a word which is seen positively these days.
It's not.
Yes,
No, it's not. So you have to be careful about that.
Yeah.
And unfortunately or fortunately, if people knew just how much the retailers know about them, it's very scary.
So coming back to the use case in the shops, is that also a use case for Edge?
Again, yes, because you want to, it needs to be in real time. It needs to have low latency information, and you also need the processing power local.
So what role does OpenStack plays there? Because a lot of things are not happening at the cloud; it's happening at the edge.
Well, that's where OpenStack comes in, because if you think about it, how many other clouds can be deployed at the edge? And the answer is none.
Yes, that's why I asked the question. Yeah,
OpenStack really is the only one, and OpenStack is really become over time it's a set of components. So it's not a monolith, and obviously out at the edge where you have hardware constraints, you need to be able to deploy very small footprint infrastructure, and OpenStack has many of the tools and the infrastructure to be concentrated to smaller footprint. One of the things the working group, the OpenStack Edge Computing Working Group is working on is identifying gaps in the current tools and then kicking off projects, or actually in many cases using existing projects and adding requirements. So there's two right now. There was two sessions at the conference today. One is to add some additional federation features into Keystone to support the edge environment, because you need a Keystone to understand mesh type environments, and also another one to enhance Glance to support remote image image deployments that are remote. So if you think about it, you're not going to store the images out on the edge, all the images. You're only going to put the ones you need, and so the repository might be in a centralized location. Glance needs to be able to support that type of environment.
Okay. When we're talking about Edge and we're looking at the use cases, as you said, that if you have something in the park, you're not there's no point in gathering all of that. So that also means, that a lot of activities that are like event-based, triggered by an event, which actually leads us toward the serverless as function as a service landscape.
Absolutely. That's definitely a use case that I haven't personally explored very much, but yeah, there's definitely a need for event-type triggered services.
So is the OpenStack community looking into serverless space or not yet?
I actually don't know. I'm assuming that OpenStack is. Clearly, in the edge case, we need to be able to support containers and OpenStack both. I think there's containerized OpenStack, of course. I'm actually very excited about Kata, because Kata really solves some of the security issues that you have with typical containers, where you're sharing way too much information between possibly security-sensitive applications. So Kata really allows you to take advantage of the efficiencies of containers, but also separating them logically so that those concerns about bleeding into other containers is mitigated.
So what is the difference between Kata containers versus the rest of the containers?
Well, the main difference is Kata containers are containers that are within a very thin VM. So they're separate. So they're isolated.
Right. And will there be any kind of cross-pollination between the other containers and this Kata containers, or they serve a totally different use case, so they will continue to?
I think it's a mix.
It's a mix. Yeah. And What other things are you doing in technology world?
So mostly I've been, edge computing's been taking up quite a bit of my time.
I think we talked about the main things about edge, right? The
Yeah,
main
yeah, I was just going to
Yeah.
say that. That's most of what I've been taking up my time with.
Mm-hmm.
Other types of technologies I'm looking at, obviously I'm always looking at advanced networking, some very interesting work around that. Again, service chains and the integration of service chains around network services. It's actually very interesting because, traditionally these are services that haven't needed to play together because they're in separate boxes, and now with this edge and the network services in a box, all of a sudden you have to make sure that these play together. So it's actually been a very interesting journey in working with the vendors to get them to work together.
Right. Okay. Now I'm just changing the topic altogether. You hang out in the technology community. You're a technologist. Do you also watch science fiction and stuff?
Well, I'm a science fiction fan, so.
I was talking to Tim Bell yesterday from CERN, and I was asking that when you look at Black Mirror, mostly what happens is it's like they paint a picture of dystopian world that always bad, bad, bad. But I mean, we love technology and we see so many good things are happening. Why is it that always science fiction pictures it negatively?
I don't think that's true about science fiction. If you look at science fiction from the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, it's actually not dystopian at all. I would say, the early science fiction, the hard science fiction.
Oh yeah,
people,
you're right. Yeah.
Joe Haldeman. And those guys were all actually very much enamored. I mean, many of them were physicists and engineers in real life. You couldn't make a living as a science fiction author. And they absolutely love science fiction, and I mean, they love technology and they embrace technology.
Yes.
So I would actually, Arthur C. Clarke's another one who, he himself was a technologist.
I know. He lived in Sri Lanka, and when he was alive, I was a big fan, so I wrote a letter to him and he replied. So it was fun. I mean, I was a big fan of Michael Crichton and all those people.
Yeah.
Isaac Asimov,
Isaac Asimov.
So I think one of the big difference.
And again, Isaac Asimov was a scientist.
Yes. So
Carl Sagan also.
Exactly. So the reason I was asking this question was, I mean, there has to be some context. The reason was that maybe these days, not a lot of science fiction writers, they actually invest time in understanding these technology that are going on there. So much is happening as a tech journalist. I have to keep up with, every.
I'm involved in the science fiction community, and I would say, I attend some conventions. We have a housemate.
We should just talk about what all do you do. You do so many different things.
Anyhow, my housemate runs science fiction conventions. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Awesome. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Where is it?
Well, she's her name is Sharon Sparsky, and she's like the program chair for I think she's the program chair for WorldCon this year. So. Okay. So yeah, that's what she does. And she, what I find is I think, it's run by the publishers and who's reading science fiction.
Right.
If you go to a lot of science fiction conventions today, they kind of fall into two camps. There's the media ones that really focus on the media, and they tend to be attended by younger people. So I use the example of Arisia and Boscone. They're both Boston science fiction conventions. They're both held within a month of each other. Arisia now is very media focused. It's got lots of costuming. It's got, a lot of videos. Anime is big. And they always sell out. They have I think it's 1,800 people, and they sell out every year now. Very, definitely a young crowd. My son loves going there. Boscone, which is literally a month later, is an older crowd. And they tend more toward sort of the traditional readers, and they're interested in a lot of the blogging kind of activities. Okay. And what I found is a lot of the older crowd has moved more toward fantasy. so science fantasy and C.J. Sherry type science fiction. So I think there's just been a shift in the industry.
It's happening across. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we can just talk about so many things with you that we need longer sessions then. But anything else you'd like to talk about today before we wrap up?
Other than that, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, same. Yeah, and it's like always fun. We can go all the hardcore technology to science fiction, or to politics, or to diversity, whatever is going on. So, Beth, thank you so much for talking to me today,
Thank
and
you.
hopefully we'll see you again at the next summit.
Yes.
Thank you.